But our top story this morning is the Doomsday Prophet murder trial. And one of the jurors is joining us live to talk about the recommendation to sentence Chad Daybell to death. In case you missed it, here was the moment we all watched Daybell's sentence being handed down.
The jury finding beyond a reasonable doubt and having returned the special verdict that the aggravating circumstances when weighed against the mitigating circumstances do not make the imposition of the death penalty unjust. The court, therefore, on count one, the defendant is sentenced to death.
Here to discuss juror number 12 from Chad Daybell's case. Her name is Dana, and we're so pleased to have her as our special guest. Dana, good morning. It's very nice to see you.
Good morning.
Let's start with the process of this trial. When you were summoned for jury duty, did you ever think that you would be picked and then wind up being one of the panelists who would take this all the way through the penalty phase?
No, I didn't. You know, you're called for jury duty and you go down for your jury summons. And I just noticed there was a whole bunch of people there, which was kind of odd because it was an outstanding number of people. And finally, after we get into the courtroom, they tell us why we're there. And I really didn't know Chad Daybell. I'd heard the name, but I didn't really know anything about him. And as we got through it and we got picked to be on the jury, then, of course, you know, we learned more about it. And it was quite overwhelming to be picked for a case that actually is a capital murder case.
Oh, I'm sure, Dana. And you said you didn't know anything about Chad Daybell. That was going to be one of the questions I wanted to ask you. If you had heard about his story or his wife, Lori Vallow Daybell's story, anything in the news prior to that you saw or read about them?
I didn't. I had heard the name Chad and Lori in conversations, like friend conversations, but I'm not a big news junkie or, you know, I don't follow the news a lot. So I hadn't really delved into it and heard, you know, the whole story and all the details and everything. I just heard the names. So everything that came out was all new and quite shocking.
Oh, Dana, I'm sure. Tell us, how shocked were you when you started hearing this case evidence?
I was in complete shock, and it came early in the trial. By the second or third day, I believe, we were already looking at graphic photos of the children and of Tammy, and then I knew that, you know, it's going to be a long, however many weeks it was. Right from the start, it started out very difficult. And the whole trial, we had good days. You know, I can't say there was ever a good day, but we had days that weren't as hard. But for the most part, every day we went in there, you just got, you know, some new little piece of information that was so hard to believe. Mm-hmm. All of this was so hard to believe because it was so out there. But yeah, and some days, especially the last 4 days, excuse me, and going into sequestration and the deliberations, those were, listening to the victims' witness statements, those were probably 4 of the hardest days of the trial, and honestly of my life, honestly.
Right. I certainly wanted to ask you about that, Dana. So when you went into the sequestration period for the deliberations, tell us a little bit about what that was like living in your hotel room without certain things like remote controls and phones, things like that.
Yeah, so before we went in there, we were given an opportunity to request certain books and certain movies. It was very limited as to what we actually got. I took some games, you know, some Sudoku and some books with me, but as far as movies and stuff and TV, we weren't allowed to have radio, we weren't allowed to have TV, computers, nothing electronic in our rooms at all. And the first night we got there was about 7 o'clock, and everything was, you know, so new to everybody to be sequestered that we just had to stay in our rooms from pretty much 7 o'clock on. We weren't even allowed to come out in the hallways to talk to each other. So it was it was quite interesting because you kind of felt like you were in solitary confinement.
Right.
You had no contact with anybody and nobody to talk to, not even music to listen to. I suppose you never really get used to it, but you know what's happening after the first day. So it did get a little more tolerable.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an
But it was
important job.
interesting.
Right, but a tough job. It is a tough job to do, jury duty. It's not easy, especially in a case like this one. Dana, what would you say was the most difficult piece of evidence that you had to review?
That's an easy one to come to my mind, but it's a very hard one to talk about. Were the photographs of JJ Vallow. That was definitely the most difficult. Just to imagine how somebody could do that to a child, to any of these people, but it was so horrific. I don't wish that on anybody, to have to see anything like that or to have to go through anything like that. And my heart goes out to every police officer, FBI, family member, anybody that was involved in this, because it was horrific.
Dana, you say something really, really important. I mean, just underscoring the point of the awful things that our law enforcement, first responders, prosecutors, defense attorneys have to see day in and day out in pursuing justice for victims like JJ, Tylee, and Tammy, and jurors like yourself. Thank goodness we have people like yourself who are willing to answer the call for the civic duty, and follow the law and what the law provides in cases like this that are so heinous and atrocious. That being said, when it was time to get to the point of the deliberations for the death penalty, what was that process like for you and your fellow jurors in that room, and hearkening back to those horrible pieces of evidence and then looking at what the law says you must do when you have a case like this one?
I think we were all a bit surprised. The instructions were very laid out for us. It was the law as it was laid out. We all took the oath to follow the law as it's laid out. And, you're given the aggravating circumstances. And we had 8 of them that we went through each one very carefully. And we all agreed on every single one. There was a couple that we had to have some lengthy discussions on. Because we had to decide every single one of these for all 6 of the indictments for the death penalty. And we were able, after hours, to bring all 8 of those aggravating circumstances on all 3 cases, JJ, Tammy, and Tylee, forward to, that's phase 1. Phase 2 is the actual where you say that it makes it unjust or basically just in layman's terms for the death penalty. And I would say, by Friday night, we were mentally exhausted. We'd all listened to all the victim witness statements all day. It was extremely emotional, and we really needed to go sleep on it, make sure that we were all in agreement that we really wanted to bring all these forward, because we knew what the next step would be. And the next step would be saying that the defendant should receive death. And so we came back fresh the next morning, and we had some more discussion. There were some more questions that people thought of during the night, which was good because that's what we wanted. We reviewed all those questions, and we still came to the same conclusion that on every count, he was rendered the death penalty. And it was a very difficult thing to do. I can't say that there weren't many of us in the room having a really hard time with it. And, a lot of tears were shed, still are. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon for a lot of us. But, in my heart, I know their hearts, I know that we did justice and we did what the law said that we had to do.
Yes, you did, Dana. And speaking of what's in one's heart, what about Chad Daybell's heart? What do you think's in that guy's heart?
I don't know him on a personal basis. I just know him from seeing him in court for, 35 days or however many days we were in there, having a straight shot view, straight across at him. I didn't see emotion from him. ever. The only time I ever saw emotion from him was when he heard himself crying on a phone call, and it was himself. So he's very self-absorbed, I believe. I can't believe anybody can sit there and not show any emotion when they're showing photographs and they're in of his wife and of the children and how horrific it was. And then the victim's witness statements. He sat and he looked at them, at every victim, and he never shed a tear. His expression never changed. He just had I don't even know what you want to call it, an emotionless face, and it never changed.
Right, Dana.
And we all, as jurors, we were all hopeful that he would give an allocution, that we could hear him speak, or, and afterwards, could we hear him say anything? And he chose not to say anything. And we were all very surprised by that, because we had very little mitigating factors to hold against the aggravating circumstances. So
right. Many of us watching the trial, Dana, were stunned that he didn't put on a shred of mitigating evidence, making us wonder, did he want the death penalty? Do you think he did?
It's crossed my mind that he may have, because even his attorney, the only mitigating circumstance his attorney was able to present was, let's take a history lesson here and look at Chad for the first 50 years of his life. He was an exemplary, human being, participated in church, raised 5 kids, was a great husband. And then all of a sudden the rails came off, and I don't know if that's the only mitigating circumstance you have. Yeah, the rails came off, but there's nothing to say that this guy wants to change. There's nothing to say that he's remorseful. There's nothing to say he's sorry. There's nothing to say he's, reformed his life or he's going to reform his life. We had none of that. And we were all quite in shock as well.
I'm sure, understandably so. Well, Dana, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and want to say thank you for sharing this insight. And again, what a tremendous job that you and your fellow jurors did with this case that was not an easy one to take in. Thank you so much, and we hope to speak with you again sometime.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take
Thanks.
care.